Good afternoon. I'm Bob Green with the National Association of Investment Companies, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the NAIC Insights series. My guest today is none other than James H. Lowry, Senior Advisor, Boston Consulting Group, and many, many other titles of influence and success. Jim, welcome.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you
So good to have you, man. I really appreciate you joining us today.
It's always a pleasure when I'm talking to you. We got so much to talk about. We've been over a lot of bridges together, and I'm sure we will be having fun and we'll get serious, but hopefully we'll be able to share some wisdom.
No, that's for sure. That's for sure. Jim, I said in the beginning in your intro that you've carried many titles. One thing is for sure, for probably close to 50 years, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, you have been on the battlefield focused on creating wealth for people of color. Is that true?
Absolutely.
So, Jim, we're going to talk about a lot today. We're going to cover, your early life. We're going to cover, as Hamilton said, some of the key moments when you've been at the room, helping to make the big decisions. We're going to talk a little bit about where do we go from here. But one of the things I wanted to talk about up front, I have been enjoying reading your book. You wrote I think it's your first book, Change Agent. Tell us a little bit about that project and how you got started with that and why now.
Well, actually, it was my second book.
Second book. Okay.
I wrote the first book with Glenn Greenhall on minority business success, and that title was Creating Wealth.
That's right.
That's right. So that was more how to, and it was two old guys kind of putting their heads together and saying, let's share with the rest of the people about how we can grow minority businesses. But this last book was a common, I'm saying many of the same things in the second book, but I think the reason I wrote, I shouldn't say this, but the reason I wrote the second book is I said, I'm not getting any younger. And so I should put on paper my journey and what I've learned from that journey and what the mistakes I made and the things I've been able to benefit from. And more importantly, all the people who helped me along the way in my journey. And I think I tried to make it not only a memoir, but also about a history lesson. And so before every chapter in the book, as you observed, that I had a history lesson.
Yeah.
About what was the civil rights, what was happening in civil rights, what were the laws that really helped me and helped others, what were some of the problems, what were the kind of national and international issues that were confronting us. And I was always trying to talk about where we were as minorities and Black people in the free enterprise system.
Yeah.
Because I thought that was so important that we really haven't spent as much time as I think on talking about that issue. I'm a firm believer in the free enterprise system. Yeah. I believe in capitalism, but I just don't feel that over the years that Black people have been really significant players as they should have been in the free enterprise system. And so that was the other reason I wrote the book.
Well, I'm so glad you wrote the book. There are two books in addition to the Bible that I think every young person of color ought to read. One of those has been Malcolm X's autobiography. Mm-hmm. I think that book tells you a lot about freedom, tells you a lot about self-determination, tells you a lot about what you can become in life, no matter where you start from. And the second book is Reggie Lewis's Why Should White Guys Have All the Fun? And I know for a generation of folks like me that grew up reading that book and hearing about the TLC Beatrice deal, that was a central book in my own personal education around this. And I'm going to add Change Agent to that pantheon, Jim. I mean that sincerely. I think the way you stack the context of what's going on in society with the important underpinnings of what people of color are doing, should be doing, and thinking about doing, I think that that's very helpful. So on behalf of a generation of young business leaders and not so young anymore, I want to thank you for writing that book and sharing your wisdom.
Thank you so very much. Coming from you, that means so much to me, Bob, it humbles me. But it was a labor of love, but it was a book I thought I had to read. I had to write.
Yeah. Well, good, Jim. So let's dive in. I've been on this journey in the Black wealth creation, minority wealth creation space for about 20 years now. And the very beginning of that journey, I went to most every conference I could on the topic. Some were the big conferences, the NMSDC and the NAIC and the ELC, and others were the small conferences, the 10 or 12 people in a local community that were, as my mentor, Terry Jones says, scheming, just trying to figure out how to put it together and try to create something. But at each of the conferences, as I sat in the back row and I took my notes and I tried to educate myself, I saw you sitting there. And the beautiful part about those 20 years is you actually haven't aged a day. You look exactly the same as you did then. That's true, Jim. That's true. You have not aged a day. But I sat and I listened, and I was always fascinated by how you brought the stories together. For those of us that run these organizations, we think that NAIC and ELC and NMSDC and U.S. Black Chamber, we think that these organizations exist, in their own worlds. But you've been at the nexus. Tell me a little bit about standing at those crossroads and seeing each of the organizations. What has that meant, and what have you learned from that?
Well, I think it goes back to, and my early history of working for Bobby Kennedy in the Bedford-Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation. And it really stems from that, to being exposed to this very powerful man and trying to do the right thing. And I think he's been a great president. And I think when he went down to Mississippi and he saw real poverty in Mississippi, that changed him.
Mm-hmm.
Changed him as a politician. It changed him, more importantly, as a man, and even as a father. I mean, after that, he would be at the dinner table with his kids talking about poverty and the need to really affect change for people less fortunate. And that just had a tremendous impact on me and working at Bed-Stuy Restoration. And then when I went to McKinsey, I saw the power of Wall Street. I saw the power of Park Avenue. And, being the first and one of the few at that time, I said, wow, there's their other world out here of very powerful people that Black people are not a part of. They're not even getting a chance of view what it was like and what do you do and how major decisions. So I just said at a very early age that this was going to be my mission, to try and bring it all together. And then you started off already talking about connecting the dots. And I remember, in early age when Bob Holland and I were even thinking about being entrepreneurs, leaving McKinsey.
Mm-hmm.
We went to this, I won't mention the name because we went to this, it wasn't a minority fund, but it was controlled and directed towards minority businesses. And Herb Wilkins was in the back as a staff person.
Yeah.
And they looked at Bob and I, and they were not minority, and they said, "Well, you two are overqualified to be minority entrepreneurs."
Right.
I said, what the heck is that? And I saw Herb literally sink in his seat.
Yeah.
And that's when he made a decision. No, I'm going to take advantage of this situation. Start his own phone, and then Terry came thereafter. I knew Terry when he was at Harvard. So he was that new wave of young Black people who were thinking much bigger. He was thinking, well, and I remember when he came to visit me in Africa, I gave him my tennis racket, he was going to play. So that's what it was always a part of me, to always reach back and help the younger generation, never be jealous of the younger generation, except that I was fortunate, but they got to take the baton and move it and really go at a higher level. And I'm so proud of both of those guys for what they did.
Well, we've had an occasion. I had Joanne Price on about a month ago. And Joanne and I got to share some stories about CINCOM and about Herb and about Terry. And I'm sure that Terry is watching this. And you and I and Terry served on the board of the Howard Eli Institute, and spent some time with our friend Baron Harvey there. So yeah, let's do this, Jim. Let me just frame something, and then I want to talk about your early experiences, not in business, but as a child. I kind of want to go back there just to touch on it because you did it in the book. But to frame this today, folks, I've had consultants in the financial services space on. I've had fund of funds leaders on. I've had capital allocators on. Today is a day that we're really going to talk about the movement. not the civil rights movement, but the economic rights movement. And Jim Lowry is going to help us sort of travel that journey, but really help us understand where we've been and where we've gone. So, Jim, let's go back to your childhood. You grew up in Chicago, right?
Yes.
And you had some very key early influences from your parents. Talk to us a little bit about how you grew up, Jim.
Yeah, I was from the south side of Chicago. Back in those days, Chicago's still kind of segregated, but back in those days, it was very segregated. So we lived on the south side, and I said in the book that it was, the neighborhoods were like little towns, and people took care of each other. It was very safe. It was, I used to say middle class. It wasn't. It was lower class or
Mm-hmm.
lower middle class, and we had a lot of fun. My parents were postal workers.
Mm-hmm.
And like many of the people in their generation, they thought the salvation for their kids was education.
Yeah.
So always kind of said you have to do well in school. My brother and I, who was 4 years older, tried to excel in the classroom as well on the athletic field, and that was our life. And he was fortunate enough to go to this very exclusive private school. And being a proud younger brother, I said I want to do the same thing, and we were both able to go to this very private school called Francis Parker on the north side of Chicago. So every day I'd have to take 3 transfers from my house to get to the north side. And it was just like another world. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
we were both good students in a public school, straight A students. But when we got to that other environment, and they're reading Chaucer and Shakespeare in 6th and 7th grade, they're speaking French and stuff. I said, wow, this is another world for me. And so I had to, say, okay, you got to up your game if you're going to be able to survive here. So that was one impact. The other impact was many of the students, a lot of them were scholarship, but many of the students were rich. And so to be functioning in this area, on the north side of Chicago with these very rich parents, seeing limousines coming up to the room and coming up to the school, dropping kids off, and we never could eat out. We didn't even have a car.
Mm-hmm.
It was something that said, okay, once again, take it in, try and make the best of the situation. But it was at that time, I'll be honest with you, Robert, I said, I'm going to earn some money. And
Mm-hmm.
if at all possible, I'm going to be rich.
Mm-hmm.
If at all possible, I'm going to be a millionaire. Because
Right.
I saw that and I said, this was my goal. So it was always in the back of my mind that I was going to be rich,
Mm-hmm.
I was going to be influential, and I was going to use the power that was accumulated to help others. And
Very good. And you have clearly lived into that experience. You know, Jim, it's very popular for people like us that are in business and around business to have conversation with our friends that aren't necessarily into the same things that we do. And a friend of mine recently said to me, well, it wasn't so recent, but he said it to me nonetheless, that, it's a shame that Black people don't have a business area that we can grow and thrive in, and nothing like the casinos that Native Americans have. And I turned to the individual and I said, what's interesting is we actually have a casino equivalent in almost every single industry that corporate America is in, right? The oil well, the casino, the magic thing that's supposed to create wealth, that's exactly what supplier diversity is,
yes,
right? And if you think about that as the wealth creation, wealth accelerator that it is, you really have to go back and wonder who started it? How did it get going? What brought us to this place where now, if you look at NMSDC's website, I think that the number is 400 billion in contract flow from corporate America to minority companies. That started somewhere, and I suspect you know how it started and when it started.
yeah, I think, and let's be clear. I mean, at times we did have our areas, such as in Tulsa or in
Mm-hmm.
Florida, where we had very prosperous Black business people, and it was torn down and taken away from us.
For
So,
sure.
so that was the backdrop that we're all dealing with. But you're right. I think when you start dealing, Robert, with the civil rights movement, uh, for the first time, people were giving up their lives should be at the table. And it changed the mindset of corporate America. It changed the mindset of news media. It changed the mindset of a lot of people. And I will give some of the early civil rights leaders like Jesse and others who then said part of this should be economic.
Okay.
So Jesse was one of the first, and I will always give him credit for this, when he started having these covenants around the country with these different corporations, and minority business was very much in the forefront of what he was trying to do. So that got the impetus going. As you know, once we got it going, we took off, and Detroit was a mecca for many of the people that went to school with you, came out of AT&T, et cetera, that went to Detroit because they were giving out big contracts, $200 million contracts, $100 million.
And be specific. What was so unique about Detroit? Why Detroit?
Why Detroit? I think there are about 3 or 4 factors. One, you had the big three.
Yeah.
The big three were just not only the big three in automotive, they were the big three in the U.S. industry. I mean, when you start talking about it, it was the big three. 2, the big three were producing a lot of cars that people of color were buying.
Yeah.
So so that was real. I mean, not only it made sense, but the more money black people had or brown people had, the more cars they could buy.
That's right.
Then I think the third one, once again I'll give Jesse credit, but I think Cliff Wharton doesn't deserve enough credit. Cliff Wharton was on the board. He was at that time the president of Michigan State, but he was also on the board of Ford. And every time they would have that quarterly meeting, he would ask the question, Dr. Wharton would ask the question, what are we doing with minorities? What is the spin?
Right.
So you had Jesse coming in one door, kind of pounding on the door. And then you had this quiet, very distinguished president of Michigan State at the boardroom asking the similar kind of question. And I think that drove it. I think the other things, you had the best and the brightest from the best business schools coming to Detroit, because there they could see a potential home run where they might be running a $500 million or $1 billion business. Some of them did. So I think that drew the best and the brightest there. And then once they start doing it, as you know, the non-U.S. companies said, we got to do the same thing. Yeah. I think the other thing, and you and I hold dearly, is Harriet Michelle. I think Harriet Michelle was such a tremendous leader. She had everything going for her. She was stylish. She was beautiful. She was cocky. She could drink with them. She could tell people in the most diplomatic way, you ain't doing enough.
Right.
And she was able to get her team around her like Steve Sims and other. Yeah. And she drove it. I think that was it.
Yeah. So for those in our audience that don't know, Jim is talking about Harriet Michelle, the longtime president of the National Minority Supplier Development Council. I think Harriet ran the organization for 20 years.
20 years.
Yep. And she retired in sort of the mid 2000. I'll get the year wrong, but 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there, but had a huge impact. Took the organization from being a concept and something that was, certainly prominent, but really took it and put it on the map.
Put it on the map. Yeah. And this is one of these kind of, things we share over drinks every now and then. I remember I was doing work at Frito-Lay.
Yeah.
And Frito-Lay was very involved in minority business. And it was a guy named Jim O'Neill, who was, I think he was the president of the executive committee. And he put in his own money to do a search for the president. And he said, Lowry, what do you think about this person, Harriet Michelle? Have you ever worked with her? I said, I know her well because she was kind of my client with Ernie Green at the Department of Labor. I said, she's fantastic. But I told him that day, I said, look, if you're going to bring Harriet in, she ain't going to be no wilting flower.
Right.
It might be high risk, high gain. But I guarantee you, this will take off. And that's exactly what happened, Yeah.
Well, that's outstanding. One of my favorite segments of the interviews that I do, Jim, is I do a name shout out. And I had Harriet Michelle down as one of the names, and I had a few other people that you've mentioned. So I'm gonna try to avoid having you steal all of my segment. But I'm glad to hear my old friend's name and glad that we can acknowledge her today. Jim, so we've had a series of movements in this country as it relates to people of color. We clearly have had a freedom movement, and without the freedom movement, none of the other movements would have been possible. And that freedom movement took the longest. At times, it appears that we made the least gain because remnants of it and elements of it are still in the culture today. But we know we had a freedom movement. Then we had an access movement where we had to get people into the system, had to get people jobs, had to get people skill sets. I would also say we had an education movement, right? Where almost everybody was preaching to their kids, get an education as much as you can, and it's going to fuel you. It feels like the wealth part of it has been fleeting, Jim, right? There's still places in America where talking about wealth around a dinner table for Black folks is taboo. We rather talk about other things, talk maybe even in the Latino community. But what is it about wealth that seems culturally to be an odd fit with our communities, if you'll accept that it has been?
Yeah, I think it has been. I think it's two-sided. Let me be very blunt here in saying, unfortunately, the non-minority leaders have never seen growing wealth in the Black and brown communities was good for the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that too often they looked at, somebody, Joe Blow, who's an entrepreneur, all of a sudden he's going to be rich. I don't know if I like that. I don't even know if I want to have affirmative action to create this. It doesn't seem fair, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Forgetting, all the obstacles that we all face in just getting to the table.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that that's been a part of it. And now either consciously or unconsciously, what was in our community, especially back in the 60s and the 70s, people were saying if you worked in Wall Street, if you worked with some of those big companies, I'll pick on AT&T again or GE, that you were selling out for the man.
Right.
I mean, why are you going to work for the man? You got to stay in your community. Well, very early on, especially being exposed to all this, I said, look, that doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
Because if it's a free enterprise system and capital control, and as I wrote in the book, until Black people understand that we don't have controls of real capital.
Right.
Now, we got more capital now than we had 30 years ago. But
Mm-hmm.
when you juxtapose that to real capital,
right,
where you can see now, and I think I'll get to where I'm going, is that we're missing it, but I keep coming back to, I think America's missing it.
Yeah.
When you start looking at the demographic changes that are going to occur over the next 20 years, the majority of people are going to be Black and brown.
Yeah.
And if they're not leaders in the free enterprise system, if they're not leaders in the capitalistic system, and they're receivers and not producers of wealth, that's going to hurt everybody.
Yeah.
So it is in everybody's best interest. I've been saying this for years.
Mm-hmm.
Let's create more Black businesses and brown businesses of size, employing people in our communities so that we can pay taxes, not absorb the tax money that's been produced. It's very simple, but I think people have not been able to accept that. I don't think also within our culture that the entrepreneur, the Black entrepreneurs who survived over many obstacles like John Johnson and Bob John, people like that, are really appreciated what they had to do to get there. And they should be, we know about Madam Walker, and now we got movies about Madam Walker, but there were a lot of Madam Walkers who didn't make it. They were not encouraged to make it. And we all lost because of that. So we got to change. And I think the point that you just made is so important. We're at a different place. Yeah. 2020, let's look at the world economy. It is huge, is more integrated between companies as opposed to countries. Deals are being cut left and right. Mergers are being cut left and right. And what is controlling everything is technology.
Yep.
And if we're not going to be a part of this last revolution of technology and technological change, I don't know if we'll ever catch up. Because technology, when you see 18 people, the highest, richest people in America, have more net worth than all of the Mexican society. That's a huge disparity, which is only going to get bigger. So I take my hat to Robert F. Smith but we got to have more Robert S. Smith.
Jim, I'm going to say something to you that Robert said to me. I said, Robert, I think the biggest problem for people of color is we're a generation behind the folks we're trying to compete with. And he said, Bob, that's a good point, but that's not the biggest problem. The biggest problem we face right now, and this is according to Robert, is we're a denomination behind. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, when Black people want to talk about thousands, white people are on millions.
Right.
And when we want to talk about millions, they've gone to billions. And we just saw in the stimulus, we were talking about billions and they were talking about trillions. Give me your thoughts on what that means and the implications of that.
Absolutely. I mean, and people thought I was crazy when I put this in the book. I said, look, one of my goals, if I could be a part of a cohesive, strategy, including people of goodwill, irrespective of color, and people of color, we got to create 10, 15, hopefully 20 Black billionaires in 20 cities.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't preach being a millionaire.
Right.
I think hopefully we can do it. But
Right.
if we're missing the whole game, if we think we're going to be satisfied producing 20 new millionaires a year in Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
that ain't going to change nothing on the south side or the west side of Chicago. We got to create billionaires, okay, who hopefully can remember historically Black colleges, remember many of them went to school, who can create endowments in these universities that you can really get the best and the brightest in those schools and get the best professors in those schools, get the best research dollars in those schools. It can't be done with nickel and dime, and it can't be done, with no disrespect to Pell Grants. Right. Pell Grants represent the cornerstone of all historically Black colleges, but we got to get endowments up there, Robert. Yeah. I was on the board of Grinnell College. Okay, this is a great example. I was on the board with Warren Buffett. He was on that board. Okay. And one day Warren Buffett came in the room and said, look, I got one of the trustees wants to, start his own company. And I looked at his patent and I looked at his business plan and I recommend that we ought to support him. But we shouldn't put the Grinnell College's money into this trustee's plan. If any of you guys want to write a check with the understanding that if it's successful, you write the stock over to Grinnell College, I highly recommend it. The guy's name was Bob Noyce, and he started Intel.
Wow. You serious?
Grinnell College has an endowment of $3 billion.
Okay.
Okay. And guess what, Robert? I did not put $1 into Intel. I mess up. I've had some good moves, and that was one of the worst moves I've ever made. But I was in that room when Warren Buffett put that to the board. And I'm saying that's the mindset. So, Robert, you've always thought big. Yeah. You've always made the NAIC people think big. You've talked to all your 80-odd emerging managers in your thing to think big. Don't think in terms of 20 million, 40. Think in terms of billions. How can we get to billions? And unless we change our mindset, and I'm saying we got to change our mindset as Black people, from the hairdresser to the college professor, we're like Robert S. Smith's right. If the mindset does not change on where we want to go and how we're going to get there and with whom we're going to get there, it's going to be too late.
So you and I have peppered this conversation with some names. Some of them we agreed to. I just thought of one, and I want to get your reaction. Our mutual friend, now departed, Earl Graves.
Earl Graves.
Talk to us about Earl's impact and Earl's legacy. What did he do for us?
Earl, you didn't know that. I'm giving you all my personal stuff, but I was working at the Ford Foundation. Okay, I just gotten, Dick Clark had recruited me, sent me to the Ford Foundation. Bobby Kennedy sent Earl Graves to get me and said, bring him to Bed-Stuy. I didn't even know Earl. He was just a guy with the big feet and the flashy shoes and the sideburn. That boy talked me in 24 hours to leave the Ford Foundation to go work in Bed-Stuy.
Wow.
He was a great salesman. He was an aide to Bobby Kennedy.
Yep, so, I recall.
And then Earl and I created Bedford Stuyvesant Restoration Corporation. That was Earl. Yeah. And Bobby Kennedy and I. Earl had a vision. I remember when he started Black Enterprise.
Yeah.
He had a vision for his company. He had a vision for Black people. He had a vision for his three sons.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He never gave up. And he was a great salesman. Earl was always Black. He went on boards. He really said things at boards in a way that wherever he went, be it American Airlines, and I know all the boards he served on, the board was not the same because of Earl's leadership.
Yeah.
And his logic and the way he could present. And so we miss people like Vernon was. I'm not gonna. Vernon George was another one like that.
Yeah.
Jim. There were these people who were my heroes.
But let's stay for a second on what Earl's vision was and how he portrayed Black people and Black business. Because you and I have had elements of this conversation. He put them in the magazine. He told the stories. And why did he do that? What was the point?
I think there were two things. It was a niche. I mean, because you had Ebony.
Yep.
Ebony was a different magazine. Jet was a different magazine from Ebony.
And Ebony and Jet were behemoths at the time. They were huge compared to TV. Right.
Huge. But John, for whatever reasons, never really portrayed too much about business.
Yeah.
It was entertainment, civil rights leaders.
Yep.
Jet was more feisty in its own way, you know.
Yeah.
But Ebony, and it made money. I mean, it was a middle class view of Black people, which America did not know.
It was a new paradigm. Yep.
It was a new paradigm, major corporations, and he was able, I give John credit for this, able to really highlight the potential market for Philip Morris and Pepsi Cola and I. So he got big ad dollars.
Yeah.
He didn't talk about business too much.
Yeah.
Earl saw that as a niche play.
Yeah.
And he strongly believed it, I think, because of Bobby Kennedy's exposure.
Yeah.
He said, nobody's really talking about in the same vein that John was doing in terms of the middle class Black people who were doing well in corporate America or doing well being elected officials. Earl said, no, we got to talk about Black people going in corporate America and be part of the whole economic free enterprise system. And so, it was a combination of highlighting the very strong people who did well in corporate America, but he also put the Reggie Lewis's on the front page and other people like that who were entrepreneurs.
He promoted and accelerated them in the ways that he could.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. Okay. And that was always a part of his game plan.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same thing with Butch. And Butch is now, his son is doing it, and he's dealing with the reality that he's going to do it differently.
Right.
Print is not as powerful as it used to be.
Yep.
So he's going digital. He's doing conferences. I take my hat off to Butch for trying to carry on what his father started.
Very good. So, Jim, I want to talk to you a little bit. I've spent most of my career at NAIC, and that career has really allowed me to touch more than my own community.
Yes.
Right. So more than the African American community, been able to touch and impact the Latino community and the Asian community. And if you read NAIC's website, we don't use the term Black, and oftentimes, unless we're dealing with the MBDA, we don't use the term minority because it was drilled into me that we don't want to be minor, right? We don't want to be. Now that's a term of art and it means certain things, but talk to me about your philosophy on community unification, African Americans, Latinos, and Asians. How important is it? How do you do it well? How do you ensure that everybody benefits? What's your thinking on community unification, especially going forward?
Well, I'm going to start domestically, then I'll go internationally.
Okay.
Let's go domestically. I've had a program at Kellogg since 1996, working with the council, with the National Minorities League. And we bring in people from all over the country, for 1 week at Kellogg. Yep. And when you look at the classroom, it looks like the UN.
Okay.
And they're always about, they're Asians, they're Blacks, they're Browns. And there are even some people who are so white, you say, how'd they get in here? And they were Native Americans or something like that. So they got in. And so one of the things, there are about 2 or 3 things I preach in that. I think one is mindset. One is I always think about mindset. You know, if you're going to be big, think you big.
Right.
And the biggest compliments I usually get is either from my mentees that I've helped or people who catch me in the airport and they say, Larry, or they call me Professor Larry. They say, Professor Larry, you know, I was doing well before Kellogg, but after that 1 week, I'm now rich.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so I'm changing their mindset. I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to how to work with, you should know well, most of our entrepreneurs don't know how to get capital, use capital, and leverage capital to grow. They just don't. So
Not a
this is
part of the
what
toolkit.
they just don't.
Yeah.
And then the other thing I preach, and I end up in the last lecture I give is talking about we got to go beyond just black people helping black people
Right.
and Indians helping Indians. I said, people, we got to invest in each other.
Yeah.
We have to have brown people and black people investing together to grow businesses.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like an entertainer. I've given the same speech, probably 15, the same lecture 15, and every time I get a standing ovation.
Yeah.
I get a standing ovation because that's what I believe, and they know I believe it. And I believe if we allow to be pitted against each other, all sides loses.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to do that. And getting back to our community, the whole idea of being cohesive with our community, I think that there's some geniuses out there who might not be, you know, entrepreneurs,
Mm-hmm.
but they might have the right formula or the right app or
Mm-hmm.
the right. We have to have a larger conversation between all the bright young people in our community and leverage it and respect the skills that they have that I don't have and vice versa. So one of the things I also preach, and I'm trying to create a foundation around this, is to have intergenerational wisdom exchange.
Mm-hmm.
So they're the wise old people like me, hopefully, who've learned a lot, who want to share all their things. There are people at your age that you've been there, you got more years to go and more things to do. And there's this huge number of very bright kids who have gone to the right schools, gone historically black schools. They're much larger in terms of the total populace that
Mm-hmm.
we've ever had when I started out. So how do we work together and share in a very powerful way? And then I will take it overseas.
Mm-hmm.
I think the black diaspora is real.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. And so when I was in Africa the first time, Africa was very different. It was colonial. The
Mm-hmm.
second time, been 10 years. That's when I met Terry. It was
Yeah.
10 years after independence. Now we're talking about some billionaires, Bob.
So you're talking about the period from 75 to 85.
Yeah.
Okay.
But now 2020, there's some sisters and brothers in Africa who got some serious money
For sure.
and they want to invest in us.
Yeah.
There's a disconnect.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know how much NAIC wants to work on that,
Mm-hmm.
but if I can help you connect with that money, and they come to me and they said, Mr. Lowry, we invest, we made a lot of money, and a lot of it just goes back to Europe.
Yeah.
You know, so can we work together with African Americans?
Yeah.
And really, because I think we can help them, and they can help us.
Well, Jim, you rewarded me with a dual answer. So to summarize, there've got to be connective strategies across communities,
Right.
and there've got to be connective strategies across continents.
Yes, sir.
Very good. So, Jim, let's move to. We got two more segments. We're going to throw out some names now, and I want to get your reflection on certain names. And after that, we're going to talk about. It wouldn't be fair to have a world-class consultant without talking about the strategy for the future. So let's talk about some of the names. Maynard Jackson. Who was Maynard Jackson, and why is he significant enough for us to be talking about him in 2021?
Maynard Jackson was so far ahead of his time. And first, you got to know where Maynard was coming from. You know, his background. His aunt was a distinguished professor at Spelman. His father had been a preacher. He was a genius, graduated from Boston University. I think he was only 18 or 19 when he graduated, went to law school. But he was one of those first mayors, and I would say he was the first mayor to start dealing with minority business and Black economic development from the power of the mayor's office.
Mm-hmm.
And I was fortunate enough to be his consultant for his first administration. I was in his office when he picked up the phone and called 4 presidents of banks in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I want you to have a black person on the board. And if you don't, I'm going to take the city's money out of your bank.
Right.
On Monday, there were 4 black presidents of universities on boards in major banks in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't like it when he did that. But
Mm-hmm.
Maynard was always fostering and encouraging entrepreneurs. He supported entrepreneurs. He made sure entrepreneurs and Russell got part of the construction of the new airport. He was very clear in putting minorities at the airport when it was going to be the second busiest airport in the country.
Mm-hmm.
Many of those people, have prospered and been pillars of the community. And most people don't realize there's a rippling effect on all this.
That's right.
And because he did that, many of those people who are now multimillionaires are helping other people. Even Russell's son is now doing all kinds of great things. But Maynard had the guts to do that. And he knew he was not going to be well received for that. And I will always respect him for that. And I will always respect him for the fact that because he was bold and he demanded things from people who were not used to having people like Maynard Jackson demand anything. Maynard could not get a law offer in Atlanta. He had to come to Chicago to be a partner in a law firm.
Wow. So a less popular name, but one that's near and dear to you and I, Carl Brooks. Who was he? Why are we talking about him?
Carl Brooks will always be one of my dearest friends. He had that personality, and it was just
Who was he first, Jim? What job did he have?
Oh, Carl Brooks was the president of ELC, Executive Leadership Council. And for your audience, they should know this, but ELC was, I guess it's about 25 years ago. It was formed by, I think it was only 13 people.
Right.
And there were 12 brothers and one sister who formed this group because they were just the lone rangers out there in these corporations, and they felt so lonely. They didn't have anybody they could talk to. So they formed this group among themselves to do the Jim Kazzer. I can name names.
Yep.
And then you fast forward. Now we have over 825 members who are ELC, and you can't get in unless you are either a CEO of a corporate Fortune 500 company or 2 people down.
Yep.
I credit Carl Brooks for being the real dynamo, the visionary, the iconic leader that was able to blow that out. And as you know, his favorite expression, we're the baddest brothers and sisters
on the planet.
On the planet.
Yeah.
And he believed it. He did it with style.
Yeah.
And it was tricky because you're dealing with a lot of egos.
Yep.
It really, most people don't realize that the ELC is a corporate community by the bylaws. Yeah. It's not the members, it's corporate. Yeah. So he had to, but he was able to get the major corporations, Pepsi, Coke, all of them. You got to even working together, and they would fund this. And so you fast forward, it's grown. It is the place to be. And every year we have a fundraiser that is huge, and it is very strong, financially. The place is always stacked, and because you were there. One of the things almost brought a tear to my eyes when I got that award is my Lifetime Achievement Award.
That's right.
It meant so much to me to get it from that organization. But it also made me feel good that my mentee, John Legend, introduced
that.
Yeah. So, but Carl was that. I mean, you have to have these leaders like Harriet and Carl who have style, but they're also innovative and bold.
Yeah.
To get, and, once again, just like Harriet, just like Earl, Carl has got these 2 beautiful kids.
Yeah.
Extremely well. I mean, and so the family is, and his family is my family. Earl's family is and Chris and Michelle, and, he's my family. So that's what we got to think.
All right. Moving along. Lynn Greenhalgh. Who is that and what does he do?
Lynn Greenhalgh will always, another person I have a special head. Lynn has had a program even longer than mine at Kellogg.
Who is he first, Jim? Who is he first?
He's a professor at Dartmouth School of Business.
Yep.
Amos Tuck.
Yep.
and he's British. He originally he was British. You know,
Mhm.
he's an American citizen now. He had this keen interest in minority business,
Yeah.
and he wanted to do it. He wanted to be a change agent himself. He designed this program, working with Harriet and working with others to bring talented Black entrepreneurs to Dartmouth
Hmm.
and give
Of
them
all places. Of
of
all
all
places.
places.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so here's this white British guy, you know, being one of the leaders in minority business, right?
Mhm.
And he believed it, you know. And what drove him? Most people don't realize that, and you can see it in how we acknowledge in our book. He was the civil rights movement.
Hmm.
He was in the civil rights movement,
Hmm.
and this was a way as a professor with a PhD could play a game or play part of the game to try and advance. So that was
There's that connection again, though. Civil rights movement,
absolutely
education, and wealth creation movement.
that's right. And he was great. And then, as you know, I got this contract. You talked about the grant. We got $3 million grant at Howard to start the Entrepreneurial Center.
Yep.
But you know, that came out of a report that I had done for the Kaufman Foundation.
Hmm.
And I got to know the people at the foundation. They had never given any money to a Black school,
Hmm.
never. So they had all these entrepreneurial grants, and it was a matching grant. And I said, well, why don't you give it to Howard?
Hmm.
Said, Howard, why Howard? Then I had to preach. I tell them about what Howard had done. So they got the money, and we wrote the report. And I think it was one of our better reports. And Richard and I worked on that.
Yeah.
And then coming out of that report, I met with Lynn Greenhall, and I said, Lynn, why don't you and I write a book together?
Yeah.
I mean, you're a Tuck, I'm a Kellogg, you're white and I'm Black. So let's do it. It was an easy write.
But Jim, you know, as we sort of point out the hidden gems of this movement and this space to folks, tell the audience about the AMBAP program, right? I mean, you talked about bringing all of these people to Dartmouth, right? But there was a hardcore program, class after class of people, not in B school, but class after class of people, actual entrepreneurs went to Dartmouth to learn under Glenn and the professors there simple things and complex things, supply chain management, raising capital, valuation. But I was actually fortunate enough to be the graduation speaker for one of their classes. But the AMBEC program, Advanced Minority Business Education Program, is one of the most fascinating educational programs designed that was ever presented, and it was dedicated to minority business.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then when Harriet asked me to do a similar kind of program, and don't, you know, this is part of the history. Harriet should tell you this, because her chair at the time was chairman of Sears.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, look, most of the people that come through the door to do work with Sears are not tier one quality.
Mm-hmm.
Harriet, can you design a program that we can get people to be tier one suppliers? And that's when I did it. And mine was slightly different from his, but I always had the utmost respect for him for doing this. And that's why I said, let's write this book together. And it was easy to do, because you're right. But the question I got to ask you, Robert, and all the people on this Zoom, because some people asked me this the other day at the last class I had at Kellogg. They said, Mr. Lowry, when you die, who's going to take your place? Now, my co-manager of the program, she was so embarrassed that somebody would ask me that question. She said, "Oh, that was embarrassing." I said, "It's reality. I ain't no spring chicken." But I think the question you got to ask, when he leaves and I leave, and these programs might leave, maybe, what's going to happen?
Yeah, you know, it's a great question, Jim, and I would offer to you a partial answer in the notion that this generation does have some very good leaders. My colleagues at the different organizations, be it Mark Morial, Mark had a fabulous career as a mayor, and Mark parlayed that into an outstanding career as the head of the Urban League. My friend and fraternity brother Ron Busby over at U.S. Black Chamber. Ron is working hard. Ron is always on the go, and Adrian Trimble doing an outstanding job at the NMSDC, lifting the banner higher. There is a heck of a There's a significant talent pool of leaders. But what I would say to you is that whether it's at Dartmouth or whether it's at Howard or where it's at Meharry or Fisk, um, entrepreneurship, almost like a candlelight, needs to be passed to all of the institutions, right?
Absolutely.
And that's one of the things you've taught me, just the whole notion of being in a position to make sure that everybody sees the light, because education, freedom is not free. Education is not a destination. At the end of Dr. King's career, what was he talking about? At the end of Dr. King's life, he was talking about collective economics.
Economics and the Vietnam War.
Yep. Yep.
Those are the two.
He was talking about being on the right side of the war from a moral standpoint, but he was spending those days pushing for, garbage men in Memphis, Tennessee, right?
But
pushing.
Most people don't realize, Rob, you're educating. Most people don't realize that was King's thing.
Right.
They don't. They don't remember. They remember the march. They remember the speech. They remember he died, but they don't remember in his last years he was preaching economic development.
That's right.
That's right.
So I'm going to ask you about two more names really quick, and then we're going to move on. One of the clearest winners from the minority supplier development movement has been Janet Howard. Can you talk a little bit about her, what she built, and the impact of it?
That's one of my favorite people in the world. Janice, she was in my class.
Okay.
I never forget it. She was in the front row. And I kid her to this day. She would ask a million questions. She'd been there because she's a pretty girl. She's in the front row. She had that Southern accent. Professor Lowry. And I said, boy, she's really smart though. She'd ask all the right questions, right? Then she started her company. I don't know if I've ever shared this with you. She started her company and she was doing well. Now she tells a story. So she said,
and what line of business is she in, Jim?
Huh?
What line of business?
She is in the staffing business. It started out as temporary help.
Yep.
Then went to professional staffing, and now she's even going even further. She's now in other products, and she's diversified. But to make a long story short, when she was doing about 400, 500 million in sales, one of the big companies, staffing companies, wanted to buy her.
Okay.
She came to me. He said, Professor Lowry, I got this offer. I said, don't even take it. Don't even think about taking it. I said, you got the right staff. You got your own intellectual property. There's no one can sell like you, Janet. I said, for your family, grow it. Leave it for your family, legacy for your family. Make a long story short, she took my advice, where she said she was going to do it anyway, irrespective if I said it or not. She's now doing $3 billion.
Right. A lot of people don't know that.
$3 billion. She's in, I think, about 30 countries.
Yeah.
30 countries. And she's really great because we were on a Zoom and they were talking about she was worth, I think they said 500 million. She said, well, slightly understated. But I mean, but the thing that I will always take, she was listed in Forbes as one of the top women, self-made multimillionaire.
Right. That's right.
So here was this poor little girl going to school in North Carolina, being chased from school because she was one of the first ones to be integrated. Had the guts and the power and the vision to grow to a multi-billion-dollar company. And that's why I keep saying mindset.
Right.
She had that mindset she could do it. But people forget this, and this is why I try to tell people on Wall Street, I know her history. I know she didn't just take her money for herself or buy multiple properties and Martha's Vineyard with no disrespect.
Right.
She put it back into the community. She put it back into North Carolina A&T. She's invested in scholarships for other people. That's the rippling effect that people don't see or appreciate. Just like Earl was part of starting the business school at Morgan State. There are all these stories that people don't know about.
Yeah.
But she is my giant. She's still running. Unfortunately, she just lost her husband after many years, but she's still feisty. She's still got her family. She's going to keep moving. she's going to keep growing, and she's one of my favorite models and personal friends.
Outstanding. I'm glad I asked you about her. So, Jim, we're at the last segment. No rush, but it's November 2020. We've had a pandemic this year. We've had riots this year. We've had enormous social unrest this year. And then this fall, we had corporations all over the country and the world actually raise their hand and said that they were committing millions of dollars to Black Lives Matter and ensuring equity. We put a D in the middle of diversity and inclusion for equity. We've got a lot of resources now. We've got NAIC members are knocking on the door of 200 billion in assets. We've got a $60 billion firm led by a dynamic leader, Robert Smith. Mm-hmm. The world is, for as hard as it's been, there are a lot of signs of hope and promise. What should we be doing at a macro level? What should individuals be doing? And what should we be doing at a collective level? What should organizations and institutions be doing to make the world better for the next generation of people of color?
Well, obviously, I don't have much time to handle this very complex question you asked me. So I will also say what you said. If you want to get the real answer from Lowry, read the book, because I put all that what we ought to do on Monday morning.
Yeah.
But let me be very clear. And let me be also, give credit where credit is due. I can't do all the things that I do without the support of the partners at the Boston Consulting. Mm-hmm. I was a senior partner there. I'm now a senior advisor there. They supported me when I was a senior partner to create and foster minority business. And what they're supporting me and another brilliant young partner, Black partner who's the head of our Washington office by the name of Justin Dean, is to help us think through, using the banner and of BCG and obviously the reputation that we have as problem solvers or strategy to really help major corporations in this space, to help the business roundtable and Jamie Dimon, people like that, but also help communities and even help foundations like the Bloomberg Foundation. Mm-hmm. I think everybody's trying to get this together, but the uniqueness that we have as a company and the uniqueness that maybe Justin and I have as African Americans who've been in there is to try and come up with these different plans, be it small, community-based, or even global, so we can really coalesce all these powerful people to really invest in a way that we have impact. So I think even John Rice, who you know from MLT, which is a great program that was started about 25 years ago, to really get young people thinking in terms of business, how to get into business schools, how to do well after business school, to try and come up with a way which we can brand the good performers who are trying to do the right things by D&I and minority business. But I think we got to really think better and more collectively together to make this happen. And that's why anytime you, Robert Greene, or you as the president and chair of NIC ask me for anything, I'm going to do it. Because you're at the forefront of this. You're talking to the same people I'm talking to. Sometimes we don't know that. Sometimes we do. We have to take all the things we're doing and work. Let me emphasize it very quickly, very effectively, and very efficiently. Because I've been here before, Robert. If we don't show impact, if we don't show change, maybe all that goodwill that we got right now, it might go away.
It could.
It happened before, and it might happen again. The only thing that you and I are saying, we said it throughout this Zoom, because of wealth and wealth creation is so important, and the world is so different now, Black and brown people have to be a part of this. Mm-hmm. Because we can't afford, and I would say it and underline it over and over, America cannot afford to let us be on the sidelines. There are too many of us. There are too many young people who want change. They will demand change. They want to be a part of change. They want to learn from people like you and me. We got to bring them in, unless we do, there's going to be a reckoning. And so I don't think anybody wants that. I think the other thing that, there's a schism in our country. I strongly believe that if we can get all the people of goodwill working together, and we get the younger generation working and thinking together, that we have a window of about 2 or 3 years. And we have a new administration. Hopefully they will think the same way we do. And they will come up with the programs. We didn't even mention our good friend Perrin Mitchell. When you think back to where the major changes occurred with Black and brown businesses is when Jimmy Carter was the president, and Perrin Mitchell probably had his hand in at least 15 or 20 major pieces of legislation that really moved the needle for many of us. So I always say that the government can be the catalyst, but at the end of the day, it has to be the private sector. It has to be entrepreneurs. And I think the good news too, there's some very, very wealthy entrepreneurs, billionaires who want to do the right thing.
That's right.
We just got to give them a vehicle. And that's why you're so important. That's why your organization is so important. The vehicle and the right playbook to make that happen. So I think to answer your question, I'm going to continue to try and be the strategist, the professor, to do whatever, to try and help that happen at all levels of government, at all levels of our free enterprise system. But I'm really always going to be going back to the people that are in my class at Kellogg and say, you got to be the leaders. And for the first time, I think the business leadership class should be the forefront of the change. And, I'm not saying who I'm voting for. I can't vote in New York, but I think it's a sign of the changing times when you take somebody like Ray McGuire, and I ain't saying I'm backing him at all, but Ray McGuire, who's leaving, a position, I can't tell you how much money he's making, but he was a vice chairman of Citibank.
He did well.
He did well.
He did well.
Run for public, office.
That's right.
That's a new kind of look.
Yeah.
That's sending another message.
Yeah.
Okay? And that's a message that we ought to really understand, appreciate, and value.
Yeah. Well, Jim, I told you an hour would go fast. Thank you very much from the bottom of my heart for blessing us and blessing the young folks in the audience that are listening to you and soaking up every word. For those of you, and I'm sure this is the entire audience, that want to learn more about Jim Lowry, James H. Lowry, and his story, please go on Amazon or wherever you buy books and pick up a copy of Change Agent. The book is full of many of the topics we talked about and many more. He does give a blueprint for the future of wealth creation and success for our people. And join me in giving a big virtual round of applause to my friend, one of my mentors, and someone that I just appreciate so much. Jim Lowry, thank you very much for all you've done and all you'll continue to do. God bless you.
Thank you, Robert, so much. And thank you for all the things that you have done. And I owe you and Carmen autographed copies of my book because you're in good hands now that Carmen is there to back you up. Okay.
Well, on behalf of Carmen, I will tell you that we will happily accept those books and we will read them cover to cover. Stay well, my friend, and talk to you soon.
Thank you so much. Keep up the great.
Bye-bye.
Make me proud.